Welcome to Sci-Fi Travelers, friends. In this episode, I'll be telling you the story of rookie human soldier William and Victoria, the angriest alien woman in the galaxy. Grab your coffee and sit back. Sci-Fi Travelers is about to begin. A rookie human soldier accidentally called the galaxy's angriest alien female commander "My love." The thing nobody tells you about your first day aboard a dreadnought is how loud the silence gets. William had expected the iron hold to roar. Engines, klaxons, the general symphony of 9,000 souls trying to win a war. And it did, in the corridors. But here, in the belly of the ship where the recycled air tasted faintly of ozone and other people's fear, the quiet had a texture. It pressed on the ears. It made a man aware of his own heartbeat, which was currently doing something between a drum solo and a cry for help. He was 19 years old, 40 hours without sleep, and he had already been shouted at 3 times before breakfast for infractions he still didn't understand. One of them had involved standing aggressively. He hadn't known standing could have a tone. "Move it, farm boy," muttered Jack, elbowing past him toward the briefing room. Jack was the only other recruit from William's intake cycle who seemed genuinely delighted by the prospect of imminent death. He had a grin like a man who'd read the ending of a tragedy and found it hilarious. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Good news is, on this ship, ghosts are the friendly ones." "That's not comforting." "Wasn't trying to comfort you, just narrating." Jack lowered his voice as they filed through the blast doors. "Word of advice? Don't look directly at the commander, like a solar eclipse, or a customs officer." "Which commander?" Jack's grin faltered for the first time all day, which was how William learned there were things even Jack found unfunny. "The commander. Victoria." William had heard the name. Everyone had heard the name. The way everyone has heard of hurricanes without ever wanting one to move in next door. The stories arrived pre-exaggerated and somehow still fell short of the reality that now stood at the head of the briefing room. She was tall, straight-backed, her skin a deep, warm yellow like old gold catching lamplight, and her eyes, when they swept the assembled recruits, were the unhurried gold of a predator who has never once had to hurry. The only thing that marked her as anything other than a very angry human woman was her ears, long, elegant, tapering to fine points, the sort of ears that in a storybook might have belonged to something that granted wishes. Aboard the iron hold, the running theory was that they let her hear you thinking about talking back. Nobody stared at them. Staring at them was, per Jack, how the last guy got reassigned to the sewage recyclers, and he was an officer. The briefing was a blur of coordinates, threat assessments, and the ongoing catastrophe that was the Sarn incursion. 3 years of grinding war against an enemy that treated coalition worlds like a buffet. William absorbed roughly none of it. He was too busy with the full-time job of remaining conscious. Victoria's voice cut through the room like a scalpel, precise and cold, pausing occasionally to eviscerate someone for a wrong answer. A veteran with a jaw like a cinder block got asked a question about patrol rotations and answered with such trembling incoherence that William felt second-hand vertigo. Then the golden eyes landed on him. "You, recruit, fresh transfer." A beat. "Do you understand your posting to the forward observation detail?" Here is what William meant to say. He meant to say, "Yes, ma'am," crisp and clean, 2 syllables, the linguistic equivalent of not making eye contact with the eclipse. He had rehearsed it. It was, at that moment, the single most important sentence in his entire life, and he had it locked and loaded. But he was 19, and 41 hours awake, and his brain had quietly clocked out somewhere around the second shouting, leaving a skeleton crew in charge of his mouth. And that skeleton crew, faced with a beautiful and terrifying woman asking him a direct question, reached for the wrong file. "Yes, my love." The words left him and hung in the air like a grenade with the pin already skittering across the floor. The briefing room did not gasp. It was past gasping. It achieved a silence so total that William could hear the ventilation system, the distant hum of the reactor, and, he was fairly sure, the sound of his own military career dying quietly in a corner. Jack, beside him, had stopped breathing on principle. Somewhere in the back, a hardened soldier made a small noise like a kettle being switched off. William watched Victoria's face and understood, with the crystalline clarity that comes only in the last moments before annihilation, that he was about to become a cautionary tale. The recruit who called Commander Victoria, "My love." They never found the teeth. She turned. Slowly, the way a gun turret turns. The golden eyes fixed on him, and every soldier in the room leaned imperceptibly away. The collective flinch of people who have learned that proximity to lightning is best avoided. And the explosion did not come. William, white as the recycled air, watched something move across that fierce face. Not rage, but something stranger. Something that arrived like a stone dropped into water she'd spent years pretending was frozen solid. Surprise first, then a flicker of being genuinely, deeply thrown, as though the two idiot words had slipped past every wall she'd ever built and touched a place her armor didn't cover. This was a woman who had been feared for so long that she had forgotten what any other reaction to her presence felt like, who had been obeyed, saluted, dreaded, and never, not once in longer than she cared to count, spoken to with anything resembling tenderness, even the accidental kind. "Say that again, soldier," she said, and her voice was not angry. It was quiet, oddly, impossibly quiet. And in that quiet, the entire frozen room understood what William was only beginning to grasp, that the galaxy's most feared commander had just been disarmed, not by any weapon in the Sarn arsenal, but by two exhausted words she clearly hadn't heard aimed at her in a very, very long time. William did not say it again. What he said instead, in a voice that had climbed roughly an octave since that morning, was, "Ma'am." "Yes, ma'am, I meant ma'am. It's been a long day. Days. A long several days." He heard himself and could not stop himself, the way you cannot stop a landslide by frowning at it. "I have a great deal of respect for the chain of command and no romantic intentions toward it whatsoever." For one terrible heartbeat, Victoria simply looked at him. Then something in her expression sealed shut again, the water refreezing, the armor sliding back into place with an almost audible click. "Dismissed," she said to the room, and the word came out clipped and cold and normal, and 9,000 years of collective tension exhaled through the blast doors as 40 recruits fled with the dignified urgency of people pretending not to run. She did not flay him. She did not reassign him to the sewage recyclers. She said nothing further to him at all, and this, William would learn over the following days, was somehow the worst possible outcome. "You don't get it," Jack explained that evening, with the grim relish of a man narrating someone else's funeral. They were crammed into the mess hall, a cathedral of steel and bad lighting where the food was technically nutritious and spiritually an insult. "When she yells, that's fine. Yelling means she's decided you're worth the oxygen. Silence." He shook his head and stole William's protein cube. "Silence means she's thinking about you. Nobody survives being thought about." "That's not a real rule. It's the realest rule on this ship. Corporal Owen once got the silent treatment for a week. You know where Corporal Owen is now?" "Where?" Jack chewed thoughtfully. "No idea. That's the point." Word had, of course, already metastasized through every deck of the Ironhold at a speed that suggested the ship's comm relays existed primarily to spread gossip and only incidentally to fight the war. By the following morning, William had a reputation, a nickname, and, he suspected, a betting pool. He was the man who flirted with death, and death said maybe. Grizzled engineers he'd never met saluted him with exaggerated solemnity in the corridors. A supply clerk asked, entirely straight-faced, whether he could put in a good word with the commander about requisitioning better coffee. Somebody had drawn a small heart on his bunk locker in what he sincerely hoped was grease. The war did not care about any of this. The war continued in the background of everything, a low and constant pressure. Briefings grew tighter, patrol reports came back thinner, and the name Havenmore began surfacing in officers' conversations with the particular flatness people use for bad news they haven't finished being afraid of yet. A coalition world on the frontier, its evacuation lanes already half choked with refugees. The intelligence chatter suggested the Sarn were choosing their next meal, and Havenmore had begun to smell to the enemy like something ripe. There was worse, and William only caught the edge of it, the way you catch the edge of a conversation not meant for you. Twice in a week, fleet movements had gone wrong in ways that couldn't be blamed on the Sarn's competence. A patrol vector that should have been secret had been waiting for an ambush. A resupply window had closed a full hour before it should have. Somewhere aboard one of the coalition ships, someone was handing the enemy a map, and the officers who muttered about it kept glancing without meaning to, toward the Ironhold's own corridors. On the 9th day, William was summoned, not shouted at, summoned, by a runner, formally, to the commander's command detail, which made no sense because the command detail was an elite rotation and William's chief qualifications were an accidental declaration of love and a talent for standing aggressively. Victoria did not look up from her console when he entered. Her quarters doubled as a working office, spare and severe, the only decoration a single scarred plate of armor mounted on the wall that William would later learn was not a trophy, but a warning. "You've been reassigned to my detail," she said. "Effective now." "Ma'am, may I ask why?" "Because a liability is safest where I can see it." Now she did look up, gold eyes level and unreadable. "You are, recruit, the most dangerous thing on this ship. Not because of what you might do, because of what you already did, which is remind an entire briefing room that I am capable of hesitating. That is a rumor I cannot afford, so I will keep you close, and I will work you until the rumor curdles into pity, and everyone forgets there was ever a moment." It was, William thought, a genuinely excellent plan, ruined only slightly by the fact that her ears, those long, elegant, wish-granting ears, had gone the faintest shade of warmer gold at the tips while she delivered it. He had the good sense not to mention this. He had, at last, learned something. "Understood, ma'am," he said. 2 syllables. Correct ones. A personal triumph. Her mouth did something that wasn't a smile but shared a border with one. "We'll see," she said, and turned back to her console, where, William noticed, and pretended not to, a flagged report on the fleet's security breaches sat open, the word traitor blinking quietly in the corner like a heartbeat nobody wanted to hear. The supply run to Kesk Station was supposed to be simple, which William was beginning to understand was military shorthand for nothing about this will be simple. Kesk was a derelict, a listening post the coalition had abandoned 2 years back when the front moved, now a hollow ring of frozen corridors drifting in the dark. The Ironhold needed the fusion cores still racked in its reactor bay, and Victoria, for reasons that were probably about the traitor and definitely not about William, had elected to lead the retrieval herself. A shuttle, a skeleton team, and, because a liability is safest where one can see it, one recruit whose great contribution so far had been carrying things and not dying. They had just finished loading the second core when the shuttle exploded. It didn't explode dramatically. That was almost the worst part. There was a soft, apologetic thump from the docking clamp, a shudder through the station's frozen bones, and then the viewport showed their ride home tumbling away into the black, venting atmosphere in a lazy silver spiral. The skeleton team had been aboard it. William and Victoria had not. The blast doors between them and the docking ring had sealed on emergency protocol, which was the only reason they were alive to appreciate how thoroughly they were now going to die. "Well," said William, into a silence broken only by the tick of failing life support. "That's inconvenient." Victoria was already at the station's dead console, coaxing a flicker of amber light from a system that had been asleep for 2 years. The clamp charge was deliberate, timed. Someone wanted this shuttle to leave without us. Her voice was flat, professional, and William was learning to hear the temperature beneath it. This was cold in the way a struck flint is cold, right before the spark. "Someone wanted me to leave without me." "On the bright side," William offered, "if they're trying to kill you specifically, that means I'm just collateral, bystander casualty. I find that oddly relaxing." She looked at him. "You talk when you're frightened." "I talk always, ma'am. The fear just improves the material." The station had air for maybe 6 hours if they sealed themselves into the old command node and did nothing strenuous, which meant 6 hours of doing nothing strenuous, which meant, to William's slow dawning horror, 6 hours of talking to her. They sat against opposite walls of a room built for people long dead, the emergency lighting painting everything the red of a held breath, and at first neither said anything, because she was a commander and he was a roomer, and there was a war-shaped canyon between them. It was Victoria who broke it, which surprised them both. "You want to know how I became like this?" Not a question. Everyone does. They think there was one moment, a tragedy with an edge to it. She turned the scarred old rank pin over in her fingers, again and again. There wasn't. There was a war before this war, and a world that isn't a world anymore, and a child who learned very young that if you are frightening enough, people stop long enough for you to survive. I got good at it. Then I got promoted for it. Terror is efficient. It saves speeches. Her mouth twisted. It's a terrible way to be known, but it's a very effective way to be obeyed, and I stopped being able to tell the difference somewhere around my second command. William was quiet for a moment, a genuine feat. "For what it's worth," he said, "I enlisted because I was afraid of being ordinary. My whole town, everybody knew exactly who they'd be at 70. I could see my whole life laid out like a field with the rows already plowed. So I ran off to fight aliens." He winced. "No offense." "None taken. I'm barely an alien. I have ears. They're very nice ears." The words were out before his frightened, chattering mouth could vet them. And there it was again. That flicker, that stone in still water, the warmer gold climbing the fine points of them before she turned her face into the red shadow. "Recruit. Sorry. Fear. Improves the material. We covered this." And Victoria, the galaxy's angriest commander, the eclipse, the storm that veterans apologized to, laughed. Just once. Short, startled, escaping her like a prisoner going out a window she hadn't known was open. It was a real laugh, unarmored and astonished at itself, and it hit William harder than the exploding shuttle had, because the shuttle had only threatened his life, and this threatened something considerably more inconvenient to lose. She stopped almost immediately, as if she'd caught herself doing something forbidden. The silence afterward was a different silence, softer, more dangerous. Then she stood briskly and jammed the old rank pin into the console's manual port, rerouting the last of the station's power into a distress burst. "We should signal the ship," she said, not looking at him, "before we say anything else stupid." "Agreed, ma'am. Wouldn't want that." "No. Terrible habit. The worst." Neither of them, William noted, was entirely successful at pretending the laugh hadn't happened, and when the Ironhold's rescue beacon finally answered 40 minutes later, blazing gold across the dead console, they were both sitting a good deal closer to the middle of the room than they had been, and neither one of them mentioned that either. Back aboard the Ironhold, Victoria became a glacier. It happened between one shift and the next, so clean that William would have doubted the whole thing on Kesk Station, had he not still had the frostbite on 2 fingers to prove it. The woman who had laughed into the red dark was gone, replaced by the commander the rumors had promised. Cold, precise, addressing him only in orders, never once meeting his eyes for longer than duty required. She worked him mercilessly. Double rotations, thankless inventory, the kind of tasks designed to remind a man of his place, which was at the bottom, holding a clipboard. William understood what she was doing. That was the maddening part. He understood it perfectly, and it still stung like salt in the cold. "She's protecting you," Jack said, though for once he didn't look like he found it funny. "And her. Fraternization regs on a warship aren't a suggestion, farm boy. They're a paragraph with a firing squad attached. She's got a command to hold and a war to lose. You're a recruit who called her my love in front of 40 witnesses. There's no version of this that doesn't end with somebody reassigned to a very cold place." "I know." "Do you? Because you've got the exact face of a man about to do something noble and stupid." He did. He waited until the corridors thinned into the ship's long, artificial night, and he went to her working quarters, and instead of the humor that had been his shield since the day he'd arrived, he tried, for the first time, the far more terrifying weapon of simply telling the truth. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Victoria didn't look up from her console. "Denied." "I'm going to anyway." That got her attention, the gold eyes lifting, sharp with warning. "Recruit!" "You laughed," he said. "En casque, and ever since you've been trying to bury it under enough scut work that we both forget it happened. And I'll do the work, ma'am. I'll count every rivet on this ship if you order it. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know the difference between a commander protecting her people and a person protecting herself. You taught me that difference. In a freezing room, with 6 hours of air. Seemed important to you then." The silence stretched. Her jaw was tight, her hands very still on the console, and William braced for the storm he'd been outrunning since his first day. It didn't come. What came instead was quieter and worse. "Do you know what happens to a commander who is known to have a weakness?" she said. "Not to me. To the 9,000 people who trust me to be the frightening thing between them and the Sarn. The moment I am a woman who can be reached, William, I am a woman who can be used. Against them. Against you." She stood, and for once there was no armor in it, only weariness. "I have spent my whole life being untouchable because touchable people, in my experience, do not survive. Do not ask me to unlearn the only thing that ever kept me alive because you and I shared a laugh in a dying room." It was the first time she had used his name. Before he could answer, the console behind her shrilled. A priority alert, red and insistent. She turned, read it, and William watched the woman evaporate, and the commander snap back into her bones in the space of a breath. "Forged transit orders," she said, "all ice now, and this ice had purpose. Someone routed the Havenmore evacuation convoy through the Perrin Drift. That corridor's been compromised for a week. It's a killing ground. The Sarn will hit them in 3 days." Her fingers flew across the console. "This isn't a leak anymore. This is a hand on the wheel, steering our people into the enemy's mouth." Unmasking the saboteur took them both, and it took the rest of the night. William, it turned out, had one genuine talent beyond talking. He noticed small, wrong things, the way a farm kid notices one fence post leaning before the whole fence comes down. It was he who spotted the discrepancy, a supply requisition timestamp that didn't match its own authorization, a signature routed through a dead man's credentials. Victoria, who traced it home. The traitor was Lieutenant Owen. Not a villain from a war poster. A quiet, competent quartermaster with 14 years of service and a family on a border world the coalition had quietly written off as indefensible 6 months ago. He'd been selling coordinates to buy his children passage off a planet his own side had already decided to lose. When they cornered him in the requisition bay, he didn't run. He simply set down his data slate and said, exhausted, "They were going to burn either way. I just wanted mine on a ship that was leaving." And something in that landed in the space Victoria kept armored, because she of all people knew what it cost to choose survival over honor. She had him confined, not executed. Then she turned to William in the red emergency light, and this time she did not look away. "The convoy," she said. "We can still reach Havenmore before the Sarn spring the trap. It means taking the Ironhold into the Perrin Drift ourselves. Against orders. Against sense." A pause. "I need someone at my side I know is not lying to me. In the whole fleet, that is currently a list of 1. "Ma'am." "You," she said. "You inconvenient, honest, over-talking recruit. Try not to declare anything to me until after the battle." "No promises, ma'am." The ghost of the Kesk laugh flickered at the corner of her mouth, and then she buried it, and gave the order to turn the ship. The Perrin Drift was a graveyard of dead stars and worse ideas, and the Ironhold went into it alone. The Sarn Armada was waiting exactly where Owen's stolen coordinates said the convoy would be. A dark wall of angular hulls, patient as spiders, ready to fall on a column of unarmed refugee ships. What they found instead of easy prey was a dreadnought coming in hot with its guns already speaking, and the confusion of that first moment bought the convoy its only mercy. the seconds it took the Sarn to stop being predators and start being a fight. "Bring us between them and the civilians," Victoria said from the command dais, and the Ironhold groaned as it turned its scarred flank into the enemy's fire like a body stepping in front of a blade. Every gun. Fire as they bear. It was not a battle the ship was built to win. William understood that from his station at the observation console, watching the tactical display bleed red where their shields failed one section at a time. The Ironhold was one ship. The Sarn had brought a fleet. The math was the kind of math that ended in obituaries. What the Sarn did not have was Victoria, and what Victoria did not have, for once, was any intention of playing fair. "They committed early," she said, gold eyes fixed on the display, and William heard it. The cold flint waiting for its spark, but aimed outward now at last, at something that deserved it. "They deployed to ambush a convoy on Owen's coordinates, which means their whole formation is built around a spot in space they think is a killing ground." Her mouth curved into something with teeth. "So let's give them the corpse they're expecting." They gave the Sarn the convoy, or the appearance of it, a cluster of the Ironhold's own drones and empty cargo shells, drives flaring bright and slow and helpless, wandering straight into the trap the enemy had spent a week arming. And the Sarn, disciplined and greedy and utterly certain, sprang it, the whole armada wheeling to converge on the bait, guns and mines, and every mistake of overconfidence firing at once on a knot of empty tin, which put their backs to a real dreadnought. "Now," Victoria said, and the Ironhold fell on the Sarn rear like the wrath of a small and furious god. It was in the middle of that chaos, the ship shuddering, decks buckling, William gripping his console as the world tilted, that the hull breach alarm went off 2 sections over, and he saw on the display the little cascade of failures that meant the observation deck's escape corridor was collapsing, and that Victoria's command dais, exposed on the compromised port side, had 30 seconds before the section around it lost pressure entirely. She was still giving orders. She hadn't seen it. Or she had, and had decided the battle mattered more than the 30 seconds. William did not remember deciding to run. He remembered the corridor tilting and the emergency door already grinding shut, and getting his shoulder into the gap the way you get a shoulder into a stuck barn door in a storm. And Victoria's face when she turned and saw him there, furious, because of course furious, shouting at him to get back, that this was an order. "With respect, ma'am," he gasped, hauling her through the closing gap by the arm as the dais behind them screamed and vented into the dark. "I've never once followed your orders correctly, and I'm not going to start with the one where you die." They hit the deck together on the safe side as the bulkhead sealed. Somewhere over the failing comms, an open channel was still live. The whole ship could hear them, which William only realized later. And in the roar of the battle and the certainty that there might not be a later, she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them bothered any more with the canyon between commander and rumor. "When we were on Kesk," she said, "and you said the thing about my ears, I have thought about it every day since, which is idiotic. There is a war. There's always going to be a war, ma'am. I checked. It's very reliable." "William, I love you," he said plainly. No slip, no exhaustion, no accident this time. Just the truth she'd taught him was the only weapon he had that she couldn't deflect. Meant it the first time. Meant it more now. You can court-martial me after we win. And over an open channel heard by 9,000 souls, the galaxy's angriest commander reached out and took a rookie's hand, and held it, and did not let go. The Sarn broke 20 minutes later. Caught between the Ironhold's guns and their own sprung trap, their formation came apart, and the ones that could flee fled, and the ones that couldn't stopped being a problem. The convoy, every last civilian ship, lived. Haven Moor lived. The Ironhold, battered nearly to death, its port side a ruin and its dais a memory, limped out of the Perrin Drift with both its commander and its most inconvenient recruit still breathing, still holding on, and the whole ship would swear to it afterward, both of them entirely failing to look like people who had just been very professional about a battle. The war did not end at Haven Moor. Wars are not so tidy, But Havenmore was where it turned, the way a river turns, not all at once, but decisively, so that afterward everyone agrees the current had been going that way for a while. The story of one dreadnought going alone into the Perrin Drift to stand between the Sarn and a convoy of refugees did something the coalition's speeches never had. It embarrassed the timid admirals who'd written off border worlds like Owen's as indefensible. It rallied 3 hesitant fleets that had been waiting to see whether anyone would actually fight. And it rattled the Sarn, who had built their whole war on the assumption that the coalition would always, when the math got ugly, choose the sensible retreat. A people who will send one battered ship to die for strangers are a people you cannot calculate. Within 2 months, the Sarn were at a negotiating table they had sworn never to sit at, and within 4 there was a border, and a quiet, and the strange, unfamiliar weight of a future that nobody aboard the Ironhold had really expected to be around to see. The Ironhold itself was stood down for repairs at the Tessel yards, its ruined port side peeled open to the stars like a patient on a table. William spent those weeks doing what he'd always done, carrying things, noticing small wrong things, talking too much. Except now the engineers who'd once saluted him as a joke saluted him for real, and the betting pool had quietly reorganized itself around a new and far more optimistic question. Lieutenant Owen was not executed. Victoria saw to that. His crime was treason, and the sentence for treason was not gentle, but she stood before the tribunal, the frightening commander whose word could bend a room, and told them, plainly, that she of all people understood what it cost to choose survival over honor, and that a coalition which abandoned a man's world had no clean standing to be shocked when the man reached for the only door left open. He was stripped of his rank and confined, but he was alive, and his children. William learned this quietly, and told no one, because Victoria clearly did not want it known, had somehow been given passage off their doomed border world on a coalition transport whose manifest nobody thought to question. There was, he decided, no point asking who had arranged it. Some fences you don't lean on to see if they'll hold. Jack gloriously got exactly the fate he deserved, which was promotion. His talent for narrating doom turned out to be precisely what a shaken crew needed to hear it survived, and he took to it with the horrifying enthusiasm of a man born to explain tragedies to people right after they'd stopped being tragedies. He appointed himself, without any authority whatsoever, the official chronicler of the man who flirted with death, and death said, "I do." William stopped trying to correct him around the 40th retelling. And Victoria was still Victoria. She was still ferocious, still capable of reducing a careless ensign to component atoms with a single golden glance, still the frightening thing that 9,000 people were glad to have between them and the dark. That had never been armor she'd needed to shed. What she shed was the other thing, the certainty that being reachable meant being destroyed, that a person who could be touched could not survive. It turned out you could be both. It turned out, in fact, that the crew trusted her more now that they'd heard her, over an open channel, take a rookie's hand instead of a rifle. Terror had saved her life 100 times. But it was the other thing, the thing she'd buried since a war before this war, that finally let her stop merely surviving and start, at long last, to live. The regulations remained. Fraternization was still a paragraph with a firing squad attached, and Victoria was not a woman who did things quietly or halfway. So she did the characteristically fearless thing. She went to the Admiralty she'd just embarrassed into winning, and she told them, without apology, that she would be resigning her front-line command to take the training post they'd been begging her to accept for years, teaching the fleet's recruits how to be the frightening thing between the coalition and its enemies. It removed her from William's chain of command entirely. It solved the paragraph, and it meant, she noted dryly, that she would be professionally responsible for a great many 19-year-olds who had not yet learned to say yes, ma'am, correctly. "I have relevant experience," she said. Which is how, on a quiet morning at the Tessel yards, in a briefing room that was not aboard a dreadnought and did not smell of ozone and fear, Victoria stood at the head of a room and ran her first orientation, and at the end of it looked down at the one recruit in the front row who was not, technically, required to be there at all. "You understand your posting," she said. Not a question this time. There was the ghost of the Kesk laugh in it, unburied at last, allowed to stay. And William, who had come aboard a warship a frightened boy trying to outrun an ordinary life, and had found in the most terrifying woman in the galaxy something no plowed field back home could ever have promised him. Looked up at her and did not slip, and was not exhausted and made no accident of it at all. "Yes, my love," he said. She did not ask him to say it again. She didn't need to. She'd heard it perfectly the first time. Think about the two words that changed everything. Not "I love you." Not some grand speech rehearsed for the right moment. Just a slip. Two tired words that fell out of an exhausted boy who wanted nothing more than to survive his first day. He didn't mean to say them. He was terrified. And yet those two accidental words reached a place 1,000 weapons never could, because the fiercest person in that room had simply never been spoken to with tenderness, and had built an entire life around pretending she didn't need it. That's the thing worth sitting with. Victoria wasn't feared because she was cruel. She was feared because being frightening had once been the only thing that kept her alive. Somewhere along the way, the armor she wore to survive became the wall that kept everyone out. How many of us have done exactly that? Built ourselves so hard, so untouchable, so fine, that we forgot the difference between protecting ourselves and imprisoning ourselves. How many of us are still waiting for someone to look past the version we perform and speak, by accident or on purpose, to the person underneath? And here is the harder question. It took a war, a dying station, and a battle against impossible odds for these two to admit what they felt. It took nearly losing everything before either of them was willing to reach out a hand. But you don't have to wait for the ship to break apart. You don't need a catastrophe to give you permission to be honest with the people who matter. So ask yourself, what are the two words you've been too afraid, too tired, or too armored to say? And who is standing right in front of you, quietly hoping, without daring to hope, that one day you'll finally say them on purpose? Because the tragedy isn't saying the wrong thing. The tragedy is spending your whole life never saying the right one at all. The end. We've reached the end of another sci-fi traveler story, friends. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. See you in the next sci-fi traveler story.